Happy Easter. I would like to start with a song. Christ has risen while earth slumbers. Christ has risen where hope died. As he said and as he promised, as we doubted and denied. Let the moon embrace the blessing. Let the sun sustain the cheer. Let the world confirm the rumor. Christ is risen, God is here. What do we expect to see when we visit a grave? Ideally, that it looks exactly the same as the last time we saw it, because it should, right? When I go to visit my departed loved ones in the cemetery where they now rest, I want their stones to be unchanged. Maybe a few weeds need to be pulled from around the edges. Maybe the flowers need to be replaced. Maybe the shrubs need to be trimmed back, but those are expected changes, nothing earth-shaking. A trip to the cemetery should not be earth-shaking. And yet the Easter story, according to Matthew, starts out with an earthquake. As I tell it to you, try to imagine how it would feel to show up at the tomb of a beloved friend and have this experience. After the Sabbath, as the first day of the week was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. And suddenly there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descending from heaven came and rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing white as snow. For fear of him, the guards shook and became like dead men. But the angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid. I know you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he has been raised, as he said. Come see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples he has been raised from the dead. And indeed, he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him. This is my message for you." So they left the tomb quickly with fear and great joy and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly Jesus met them and said, "Greetings." And they came to him, took hold of his feet, and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me." This is literally an earth-shaking experience for those two women, arriving at the tomb of their beloved teacher and friend, only to feel the actual ground move under their feet as the heavy stone is moved from the tomb that is supposed to hold the broken body of Jesus. Just 2 days prior, he had been publicly executed, a display of Roman power over the Jewish people. The earth had shaken then, too, at the moment of his death. I wonder if the women were surprised at these two earthquakes. Or did they just integrate the sensation of shaking ground into the experience of grief and loss? After all, isn't that how it feels sometimes, like everything has been shaken right off its foundation? So these two shaken, grieving women show up at the tomb, and they get a second shake-up when the tomb reveals no body inside. "Nope," says the angel, "nothing to see here. I know you're looking for Jesus, but he's not here anymore. He's been resurrected," just like he said would happen. Jesus had said that several times. His disciples had heard him predict this moment when he would be raised from death. These women, two of his close disciples, had shown up that morning to see the tomb. What exactly were they expecting to see? I don't know if they even knew for sure. Maybe they were simply there to mourn the way we do when we visit the graves of our loved ones. But maybe they really did go there with the hope that he had been right, that he would rise on the third day. Whatever it was that brought them there, I'm just glad they went at all. If they hadn't gone, then this story would not be ours. It is interesting that of Jesus' many followers, these two women were the only ones to go, according to Matthew, and I can understand that. I can understand why most of the disciples, consumed by grief and fear that they could be next, would have stayed home. Maybe it was safer for women to go. Maybe they seemed like less of a threat to the Roman guards keeping watch over the tomb. Or maybe the others who had followed Jesus just needed a little more time to process the death before they felt ready to go see the tomb. We all move through grief at our own pace. They too would see Jesus resurrected when they got to Galilee, like the two Marys told them to do. One way or another, the resurrection story would be told. But I'm so glad we have this story of the two Marys, two faithful disciples who felt compelled to get close up with the source of their grief and their faith and their doubt, to zoom in on the earth-shaking, life-shattering event that had changed everything for them. They could easily have occupied themselves with the busy work of fixing breakfast for the other disciples who would soon be waking up back in the rented rooms, and that would have been all right. Someone had to do that. But this story is beautiful to me because it reveals another way of interacting with trauma. When the earth shook under their feet and the worst possible thing happened, they got as close to it as they could just to see. Seeing in this context implies seeking insight into God's purposes. The two Marys went to the tomb, that place representing the finality of death, to see for themselves, what was God up to here? They were not there with anointing oils. They were not there with any stated purpose other than to see the tomb, to see what they would see, to see what would be revealed to them there as they reflected upon what had happened to shake up their world. And what they saw was unsettling, an empty tomb, an earthquake, an angel of God. Even those tough Roman guards became so afraid that they shook like the earth under their feet. And paralyzed with fear, they became like dead men, ironic as they were guarding a corpse that was no longer dead. But in the midst of all this upheaval, the angelic messenger from God told the women not to be afraid. Of course they were afraid, but their fear was combined with joy because they had seen what God was up to, and it was beautiful. The very worst thing they could have imagined turned out to be the most incredible miracle. So they left the tomb quickly with fear and great joy and ran to tell the disciples. And that's another wonderful thing about this story. The Marys didn't just keep that joy to themselves. They knew that others would need to hear the story, for the ones who were not at the tomb that day were still living under a dark shadow of grief, loss, and fear. Out of deep love for them, the women went and shared their good news so that hope and joy might be resurrected in the numb hearts of their grieving friends. Their story was not only about a resurrection, it had the power to resurrect. Our stories have that power too, when we are willing to take a close look at where we have been and recognize how we have seen God showing up for us. I recently attended a spiritual retreat where we were asked to share our spiritual autobiographies, which we had prepared in advance. In groups of 4, we each shared our own sacred stories, our joys, our heartbreaks, our triumphs, our failures, those life-shaping and sometimes life-shaking events that define us. In that circle, I heard stories that included life-threatening illness, childhood trauma, devastating loss, questioning of purpose. Those stories were full of hardship, but also of resilience. In each story, 2 things were clear. Life can be extremely painful, and God's powerful presence is almost always strongest in those hard times. We don't always see it at the moment the earth shakes under our feet because we're too busy trying to stay upright. But if we can revisit the experience, go to the tomb of a buried memory, we just might see signs of resurrection. When the earth does shake under our feet, and it will, we do not have to close our eyes and succumb to the spiritual death called despair. We can choose to look more closely to see where hope and love are showing up for us, because hope and love are of God. And even in the dark places, hope and love do manage to show up, and together they have the power to turn fear and even despair into joy. What earth-shaking events are part of your story? I invite you to take some time this week to revisit some part of your life that felt dark, not something you're currently experiencing, but something behind you. I encourage you to look more closely at that time, leaning in to see it better. Where was the hope? Where was the love? Looking back, can you see God's activity in that time? What was God doing in your life that has brought you back? Because if you or someone close to you have been to a dark place and emerged alive, then you have experienced resurrection, and that is a powerful story. Someone probably needs to hear a story like that. As it turns out, we all need to hear a story like that, which is why we have been gifted this story about 2 women who go to a tomb only to find it empty. This story helps us to see that even when the worst case scenario has come to pass, God is still showing up, ready to take our story in a direction we never could have imagined. Do not be afraid to look. The tomb is empty and hope is not dead. Even death has no real power over us because we belong to a God of life who is remarkably good at imagining new things. This story subtly reminds us of God's creativity and creative works. Hear again how this story is located in time. Did you catch it? After the Sabbath. just as the first day of the week was dawning. In Jewish tradition, the first day of the week is meant to recall the first day of creation, when God breathed God's sacred breath into a lifeless world and the void was filled with life. There is a poetic beauty to the timing of the two women's visit to the tomb at the dawning of the first day, when they discovered that their Creator has once again breathed life into a lifeless place. The first day of the week is turned into the first day of a turning point in the universe and the first day of a brand new life for those women whose despair has been turned to joy. It's the first day of a new life for everyone who would come to hear that life-giving story of resurrection. Today is the first day of the rest of our lives too. So I ask you, what fears are you ready to turn into joy? What good news do you have to share with the world? We may have to revisit the tomb in order to see it, which is fine, but let's not stay there, because the stone has been rolled away and there is nothing in there for us anymore. But there are those who desperately need to hear the word of hope from your mouth, to hear that there is life and even joy on the other side of fear and despair. As in the beginning, so it is now. Where there is breath, there is life and hope. That is the best news. Christ is risen. Just don't keep it to yourself. Christ has risen for the people whom he died to love and save. Christ has risen for the women, bringing flowers to grace his grave. Christ has risen for disciples huddled in an upstairs room. He whose word inspired creation can't be silenced by the doom. Happy Easter, and may your blessings be many.